Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which what if Naruto grew stronger early and built a powerful harem? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. Now let's start the fanfic. Being a member of Anbu normally entails dangerous work. Work that makes you question the very core of human existence. As a ninja, you are a tool, but as Anbu, you are a specific tool. You are a knife, or a sword, or an axe. You are something made to kill. So why was it this particular Anbu found himself in the middle of a Konoha park on a sunny afternoon? The answer was a young boy sitting beneath a tree. His blonde hair moving gently with the wind as he slept. The boy was alone, no parents or other children were with him, which was strange seeing as how he wasn't even 7 years old yet. As a matter of fact, it seemed that the area he was in was vacant of anyone save for the Anbu, hidden amongst the leaves of a tree. He had actually watched as children came through this section of the park, only to be quickly ushered away by their parents. What fools, the Anbu member thought to himself. Yes, he knew of the Kyuubi, knew that it was sealed within the blonde-haired boy. He also knew that the boy was about as harmful as a sleeping kitten. This wasn't the first time he had been selected to watch over him. The Hokage himself funded the money for these, A-ranked, missions. Not to say there wasn't any danger involved. The boy was often the target of the more rowdy or disgruntled villagers. But still nothing more than a single Chunin should have been able to handle. It was simply a testament to how much the Hokage cared about the child. Anbu-san's musings were cut short when he heard the boy yawn, and open his eyes, adjusting them to the light of the afternoon sun. He stood up and stretched, before looking around him. At first he looked wary, maybe even scared, and the Anbu couldn't blame him. The boy had been chased to the park by a group of genin out to make a name for themselves. Rocks and kunai had been thrown at the boy as he ran away. The Anbu had just gotten to the scene in enough time to stop the group from seriously hurting him. Of course, the genin were currently being stripped of their ninja rank by the Sandaime Hokage. Were it not for the general outcry that would surely come from the villagers, he probably would have had them imprisoned. The Anbu found that he himself liked that idea. Naruto finally seemed to decide the area he was in was safe enough, as he stopped glancing at the sides of the park. He sighed, and started to walk back to his apartment. As he did, the Anbu dropped out of the tree and waved to him. Naruto's eyes lit up for a second, and he rushed over to the Anbu. Itachi-san, he greeted, in his loud manner. The Anbu groaned inside his head, wanting to strangle his captain for forcing him to wear a weasel mask. He was pleased with Naruto's greeting however. He was one of the few Anbu who would actually talk with the boy, and the boy showed his appreciation with his excitement whenever he was the one on guard duty. "Hello Naruto-kun, are you feeling alright?" he asked. Physically, the boy was fine. However, that was normally the case after resting. Itachi was more worried about the boy's mental state than anything else. "I'm fine. They barely even got me with the rocks, and I don't think any of the kunai hit," Naruto said, flashing a toothy grin. Itachi wasn't fooled for a second, but Naruto couldn't tell due to the mask. "Alright Naruto, if you say so. The Hokage would like to see you, so why don't we head over to his tower?" Naruto nodded, and the pair proceeded towards the Hokage's tower. After a few moments of silence, a new record, Itachi thought amusingly to himself, Naruto began to speak. "Hey Itachi-san, what do you think of the Hokage?" Naruto asked. Itachi was silent for a few moments, before answering. "I think the Hokage is a strong and wise ninja. Why do you ask Naruto-kun? So you wouldn't pick a fight with him?" Naruto knew Itachi-san was strong. He had seen him fight before, normally a couple of drunkards who would find the demon brat, and decide to have some fun. "Of course not. The Hokage is a kind and honorable man, why would I want to fight him?" Itachi seemed surprised by the boy's question. "I was just thinking, maybe if I become Hokage, It'll mean no one will pick on me anymore since I'd be so strong. Then everyone would have to respect me, right? Naruto looked pleased at himself for coming up with such a brilliant plan. In his mind, it seemed rather simple. After all, if the old man could become Hokage, how hard could it really be? Itachi stopped walking and looked at Naruto, who stared back up at his guard, wondering why they had stopped. Itachi sighed, and knelt down in front of Naruto. Naruto-kun, I wouldn't pick a fight with the Hokage. Not because he's strong, but because he's a good man. Being Hokage means more than being the strongest or the smartest. It means protecting everyone in the village, caring for them whether they care for you or not. I wouldn't fight the Hokage because I respect him, not for his strength, but for his character. Naruto was obviously confused by this, so Itachi decided to elaborate. You already know about the fourth Hokage, don't you, Naruto-kun? At Naruto's nod, he continued. He was the strongest ninja to ever come from any of the elemental countries. He became Hokage not because he was so strong, but because he wanted to use that strength to protect the people of this village. The funny thing is, a lot of the people he protected didn't even like him that much. Yondaime-sama had a lot of enemies, even in the village. Yet when the Kyuubi attacked, he didn't even give it a second thought. He stopped him, not even thinking of his own well-being. Do you understand, Naruto-kun? Even though he knew people in the village didn't like him, didn't respect him, he still gave his life to save them. Naruto looked thoughtful for a few moments. So, you're saying that being Hokage means protecting people, all the people in the village? He asked. Under his mask, Itachi smiled, and nodded. Not just protecting people, but also always doing the right thing. If you really want to be Hokage, Naruto-kun, those are the things you must understand. Naruto smiled at this. Not his dumb toothy grin, but a true and genuine smile. Alright then. I will become Hokage someday, Itachi-san. Just wait and see. I'll become strong enough to protect everybody, and I'll be greater than all the Hokages put together. Itachi's smile grew under his mask. The boy was incorrigible. Well spoken, Naruto-kun, he said. Here then, we can't have our future Hokage training on an empty stomach. After meeting with the Hokage, why don't you go get yourself some ramen? Itachi handed Naruto some money, and Naruto's eyes lit up with happiness. Ramen. Yay. Alright, I get ramen, Naruto yelled, dancing around Itachi as the two continued their walk to the Hokage's tower. Itachi laughed to himself at the child's antics. If only his father wasn't such an arrogant bastard, Itachi would like to introduce Naruto to his little brother. He had a feeling that the two would be good friends. 1 year later, a young girl found herself huddled down, crying as the people around her mocked her. Shouting things about her stupid big forehead. Her knees were drawn against her, and she had her hands over her ears, trying to block out the hurtful words. It wasn't the first time she had dealt with this. For some reason, she seemed to be a favorite target of the bullies at her school. It happened at least once every couple of days. She would be sitting there, minding her own business, but sooner or later they'd find her, and it would all begin again. Seriously, Sakura, I bet we could see your forehead from space. One of them, a particularly mean girl with purple hair, said. Sakura felt herself cringe at the mean words, while on the inside she berated herself. She knew she was giving these people exactly what they wanted, but she couldn't help it. Why did they have to be so mean? What had she ever done? She might have thought more about it, but one of the girls who had been teasing her gasped in surprise. Sakura looked up to see something. Well, it was something all right. The girl who had just been teasing her stood there, only now she was covered with trash. A fish bone was caught in her hair, and she had something. Sakura didn't even want to think about what it was sliding down her arms. Ha! Now not only do you talk trash, but you're covered in it. A voice called out from above them. Standing up in the branches of a tree, and overturned trash can in his hands, stood 7-year-old Naruto Uzumaki. You jerk. The purple-haired girl wailed at him. I'm going to kill you, Uzumaki. Naruto jumped down from the tree, landing between the bullies and Sakura. He was grinning widely at the scene as the girl and her friends glared at him. Oh, I'm sorry. Here, I'll help you throw that stuff away. With that said, he took the trash can, and slammed it over the fuming girl, before knocking her into her friends. The girl cried out in shock, struggling with the help of her friends to get back to her feet. While this was happening, Naruto grabbed the pink-haired girl he now knew as Sakura, and ran off. Sakura just followed along in shock. This boy had just, with the trash and the tree, where had he? Her thoughts were moving a mile a second. Naruto for his part was just laughing that his devious plan had worked out so well. They finally came to a stop, once Naruto had judged they were far enough away from the bullies. He turned and looked at the girl who he had just saved. Sorry about that, but I thought you might be getting tired of that purple banshee screeching. Naruto said, grinning impudently at her. Sakura just stood mouth agape at the boy. My name's Naruto Uzumaki, he said cheerfully, extending his hand. Sakura finally shook herself out of her stupor, and hesitantly shook his hand. My name is Sakura, Sakura Haruno, she said. Naruto smiled at her, and she found herself smiling back despite her nervousness. It was almost infectious, this boy's smile. Nice to meet you, Sakura-chan, he exclaimed. Before she could even blush at the familiar honorific he had added to her name, the bell rang, signaling that it was time to return to class. Sakura looked towards the Ninja Academy building, and back to Naruto, but he was already gone. She looked around, but he was nowhere in sight. She sighed to herself, and walked back to class, but not before being joined by a little blonde girl, who had seen the entire event. Naruto laughed to himself as he ran across the Konoha streets. When he had heard the bullies taunting the girl, he knew he had to stop it. After all, if he wanted to be Hokage, he had to protect everyone, right? He was still trying to work out whether that meant that dumping the trash on the bullies' leader had been the wrong thing to do, but since no one got hurt, he figured he was okay. Still, it was confusing. How could he protect everyone, if some of the people who were hurting others were the very same people he was supposed to protect? Just thinking about it made his head hurt. He'd have to ask Itachi-san next time he saw him. And so he decided to skip the rest of the day's class. After all, he had spent his lunch break helping people, so it was only fair that he take some time to feed himself right. And it's not like Iruka-sensei ever caught him at it. So with those thoughts in mind, he headed to his favorite ramen stand. As Naruto sprinted towards his destination, Ichiraku Ramen, he heard shouting coming from somewhere nearby. He could only make out the words, hot-blooded, but the tone they were being used with was evidence enough for him. With an internal sigh, he changed directions. Ramen will have to wait, a Hokage in training's work is never done. The sight that greeted him as he rounded the corner was a strange one indeed. A boy with impossibly thick eyebrows was surrounded by other boys, his hands stuck firmly against his ears to ward off the taunting. The boy had wild black hair, and was wearing a white Chinese-style shirt with dark pants. The scene was almost identical to what he had just witnessed earlier, only in this case his opponents were going to be boys. Boys about a year older than him. To a normal person that would be the time to start rethinking one's actions. For Naruto, it wasn't even a consideration. It just meant that he could actually fight them if things got out of hand. Any planning on his part was cut short, however, when the black-haired boy took off, to taunts and jeers of, hot-blooded dropout. And, loser. Naruto glared at the children, but ran after the boy. Naruto finally caught up to the boy at one of the nearby training grounds. The boy was standing in the center near the training logs, kicking it fiercely. Naruto stepped into the training field. Hey, everything okay? He asked. The boy turned and looked at Naruto. His face was gloomy for a split second before it became an overpowering grin. I am just fine, thank you. The boy said. What is your name? I don't believe we have met before. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Who are you? My name is Rock Lee. It is a pleasure to meet you, Uzumaki-san. Lee gave a slight bow. Just Naruto is fine, no need to be formal. Naruto said with a grin. His grin faded though, as he said, I heard what those kids were saying about you. You sure you're okay? Lee's face fell slightly. What they were saying is true. I wish so strongly to be a great ninja, but I have no talent for ninjutsu or genjutsu, and my taijutsu isn't even that great. Naruto looked slightly angry at that. So what if you're not that great at ninjutsu or genjutsu? That doesn't give them any right to make fun of you. Besides, I'm sure even with just taijutsu you can become an awesome ninja. You just need to work hard and believe in yourself. Lee looked up in surprise, before tears started forming in the corners of his eyes. Pretty soon they leaked out, trailing down his face. He hid his face in his arm, and Naruto began to wonder if he said the wrong thing. Then, Lee's head suddenly shot up, and he held his arm out in front of him. You're right, Naruto-kun. Even if I cannot use ninjutsu or genjutsu, I will become a splendid shinobi. I will work hard on my taijutsu and become a legendary ninja. There was a fire burning in Lee's eyes now. He looked determined, and happy. That's the spirit. And if you ever want someone to train with, look me up. I need to get stronger to accomplish my dream too. Naruto said, smiling at Lee. Oh, and what is your dream if you don't mind me asking? I'm gonna be Hokage someday. That way I can protect everyone in this village and everyone will respect me. What a great dream, Naruto-kun. You and I shall train hard and someday we will both accomplish our dreams. All right. Together we'll be unstoppable, Naruto said, the fire in his eyes now matching Lee's. The two stared at each other, and then began to laugh. All right, Lee, how about from now on, we meet at this training ground after the academy? Then we can train or hang out. Lee smiled. Most kids either made fun of him for his thick eyebrows, or his poor ninja grades. It would be nice to have a friend willing to help him. That sounds like an excellent idea, Naruto-kun. Let's begin our training right now. Naruto smiled apprehensively. He hadn't meant right now, but Lee seemed really excited. He gave an inward sigh. I guess ramen can wait a couple hours. The next day Naruto found himself struggling to stay awake during one of Iruka's lectures on chakra control. Not that he thought it was boring. Okay, so he did think it was boring, but that wasn't the reason. His training session with Lee yesterday had lasted 5 hours. Most of which was spent doing push-ups or running laps. They had then spent the remaining hours sparring. Even after Naruto had gone home and gone to sleep, he was much too tired to even consider waiting 3 minutes for ramen, he still felt sore and exhausted. But he realized he liked the feeling. It was his body's ways of saying he was getting stronger. Naruto shook out of his daze as he felt an eraser hit his head. He looked around confused as the class laughed at him. Iruka was glaring at him from the front of the class. I asked you a question. Don't space off in the middle of an important lecture. Naruto laughed sheepishly, his hand behind his head as he grinned. Sorry, Iruka-sensei. Iruka just sighed, and went back to explaining how chakra control was crucial to being able to master jutsus. Naruto tried to pay attention, but once again felt himself spacing out before he felt an elbow in his side. Clearing his head, he turned to see the black-haired boy who was sitting next to him had done it. Naruto gave him a small smile, before focusing on Iruka's discussion. Alright class, now break up into groups of 2 and practice your chakra control using the exercise I just explained. What? I didn't hear any of his explanation. Naruto screamed at himself mentally. It was bad enough when he had missed the explanation on the Henjutsu and turned himself into a comically deformed version of the third Hokage. Iruka was gonna give him so much extra homework for this he might as well never leave school. Sensing his distress, the boy next to him turned to face him. Don't worry, we'll partner up and I'll help you go through the exercise. Since I was actually listening. He added the last part with a smirk. Naruto didn't know whether to be thankful or insulted, so he just gave a grin and said, "Thanks." The boy nodded, and the two stood up near their desks. He went over the exercise step by step with Naruto, before performing it himself flawlessly. Naruto grinned, and attempted the exercise himself, with less than stellar results. The boy next to him smiled a bit wryly, and gave him a couple tips. By the end of the class, Naruto was at least decent at the exercise, but by no means had he mastered it like his partner. Realizing the boy had helped him and he still didn't even know his name, Naruto caught him as class was ending. "Thanks a lot for helping me with that today, even if you were kind of a jerk about it. My name's Naruto Uzumaki." He stuck his hand out and gave a grin. The boy smirked slightly. "Sasuke Uchiha," he said, shaking Naruto's hand before heading out. Naruto smiled to himself, before running out of the classroom. After all, he had training to do. He could almost hear his body groan at the thought. Time passed in much the same way for the young blonde. His days were always spent at the academy, or ditching, if he and his small group of friends found it too boring that day, where he'd normally get a little extra help from Sasuke, and his afternoons spent training with Lee. The two had become the best of friends during their time spent together, and were often seen in each other's company whenever they had free time. This was normally spent training, of course, but on occasion they would make a stop at Ichiraku's ramen to feast on Naruto's favorite food. It was also during that same year that tragedy struck Konoha. In the span of one night, its most prestigious clan was almost completely wiped out, leaving only two survivors. One was the person who had committed the atrocity, Itachi Uchiha. The other was his little brother Sasuke, who was spared for reasons unknown. After this happened, Sasuke was removed from the academy for a 6-month period, during which no one saw him. When he did return, he was a different person. Arrogant and cold, he no longer associated himself with anyone from their class. Even when Naruto attempted to talk to him, he simply called him Adobe and left. The next year more students dropped from the academy, coming to the determination, or their parents' determination at least, that the ninja life was not cut out for them. Luckily for Naruto, his friends were still all attending. So as he entered the classroom, he took a moment to scan the room to see who the new students were. He didn't really recognize any of them, though he was glad to see that a lot of the school's bullies seemed to have been removed. He looked around and finally took his normal seat next to the brooding Uchiha. Sasuke gave him an annoyed look before turning to face the front of the classroom. Naruto returned with an annoyed look of his own before facing away from him. He couldn't blame the guy for being upset, he just wished he was willing to let someone help him. "Hey, what are you doing sitting next to Sasuke-kun?" someone said. Naruto looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. It was the girl he'd helped on occasion from various bullies. Sakura. He was about to smile and say hello when he noticed the look she, and the blonde-haired girl next to him were giving him. They looked upset for some reason. I sat here last year, so I just figured." "Well, you figured wrong, Buster. I'm sitting next to Sasuke-kun." The blonde next to Sakura said. "No, you're not, Ino Pig. I'm sitting next to Sasuke-kun." Sakura said. "PFF'd. Why would he want to sit by you, billboard brow?" Naruto looked on in confusion, before giving an incredulous look to Sasuke, who just shrugged. In that small gesture though, Naruto noticed that Sasuke was almost normal, like the days before when he'd helped the blonde with a harder technique or concept. It was enough to make Naruto smile slightly, before turning back to the two girls. "Two? Did I say two? I mean the 6 or 7 that were arguing with the original pair over who was going to get Naruto's seat next to their precious Sasuke-kun." The argument continued for a few minutes, and Naruto finally got fed up. He stood up, and grabbed Sakura's hand, pulling her into the chair he had been occupying, before sitting in the chair next to her. There was a gasp from the other girls, before they glared at him. He just gave a sheepish grin back. "Hey, Can I have my hand back? Sakura asked, her eyebrow twitching. Naruto blushed and looked down, realizing he was still holding her hand. He quickly drew his hand back. Ah, sorry Sakura-chan, he said, giving her a smile. She gave him a confused look, that sounds so familiar, before turning to smile at Sasuke. Good morning Sasuke-kun, she called out cheerfully, and was answered with an annoyed glare from Sasuke. After class was over that day, Naruto once again made his way to the training ground him and Lee shared. Well, that was certainly an interesting day. It seemed that Sakura didn't even remember him from before. Not that he blamed her. They had technically only met once, he'd never revealed himself the other times he'd stopped her bullies, but still. It seemed her and the blonde girl, I think she said her name was Ino, and practically every girl in their class had some type of infatuation with Sasuke. Lunch had been a particularly hectic time for the Uchiha, as girls were constantly chasing him down trying to eat with him. Thinking about it, there was only one girl in their new class that wasn't Sasuke crazy, as Naruto put it. A white girl with dark blue hair and white eyes. Good to know that not all girls are insane, he thought to himself as he ran. He finally came into the clearing and found Lee waiting for him. Lee seemed excited for some reason. Naruto-kun, I just met the most amazing person today. He is very kind and he told me that if I work hard enough I'll become a splendid ninja. He even showed me a few of his exercises to improve our strength and stamina. Naruto stared at Lee. Over the last year he thought he had gotten used to the other boy's excitable nature. Today though Lee seemed to be exploding with energy. Naruto's stare quickly became a grin though, when he realized the boy had learned a new way for them to get stronger. Well, what are we waiting for, Lee? Let's get started, Naruto said excitedly. Yosh. For a warm-up we shall run 25 laps around Konoha. With that said, Lee took off, leaving a dumbfounded Naruto behind. Oi, did he say 25 laps around Konoha as a warm-up? Not one to be left behind, Naruto quickly, though hesitantly, followed after his friend. 5 hours later, night had fallen, and Naruto was collapsed on the floor of his apartment, not having the strength to make it to his bed. He'd thought the first workout he and Lee had been painful. Even though he normally had a lot of energy, this was just too much. 25 laps around the village, then 500 push-ups and sit-ups before a 2-hour sparring session. I don't know anyone other than Lee who could have kept up with all that. He thought to himself as he laid on the floor. And even though he was tired and sore, he couldn't help but smile slightly to himself. It was only a matter of time until his dream came true. Soon he'd be Hokage, and be strong enough to protect everyone. His thoughts went to those people he wanted to protect as he fell asleep. The sun was shining brightly in the Hidden Leaf Village. The academy had been let out and students could be seen at various parks or training grounds, playing with friends or practicing their lessons for the day. Iruka sighed. Grading the latest test he had given his students was not how he wanted to spend the sunny afternoon. Especially when it came down to the paper he was currently grading. That of Uzumaki Naruto's. Iruka really couldn't understand it. The boy had previously unheard of stamina for someone his age. His taijutsu, while somewhat clumsy, had improved vastly during his 3 years in the academy and was above most of the students. So why wouldn't he focus every once in a while to get his studies done? If he did, Iruka was sure he'd be on par, if not pass his best student, Uchiha Sasuke. It made it worse for Iruka that he had watched Naruto carefully. At first it was because he, like most people, saw the demon fox when they looked at him. However, as he watched him, his opinion slowly changed. The boy had a depth of kindness that most humans didn't, let alone any demon. He'd seen the boy go out of his way to help others, defending them against bullies, making them laugh, or just trying to cheer people up. He felt that with that kind of character, Naruto could become one of the best shinobi he'd ever taught. If he would only focus. Sighing once again, Iruka finished grading Naruto's failed test. He'd have to do something soon. At this rate, Naruto wouldn't even pass the ninjutsu part of the genin exam. He'd have to figure out a way to help his friendly blonde student. Picking up the next test and looking it over, a small smile crept onto his face. He might have an idea on how to help Naruto out after all. Of course, it'd have to wait until after he'd finished grading the rest of these tests. The students in the class were chatting with each other for the few minutes before class would actually begin. The girls minus one dark-haired Hyuga were of course discussing the famous Sasuke-kun, and how eventually he would realize he couldn't live without them, and succumb to one of their charms. The boys were for the most part trying to ignore the sighs and giggles of the girls, as they discussed truly important matters. Like who would win in the next issue of Mega Ninja, Masks of Fury, or what kind of interesting bug Shino had brought with him that day. Naruto, normally the noisiest of them all, was oddly quiet. Despite his best efforts over the previous year and a half, Sasuke still walked around in a perpetual gloom. He focused as much of his time as he could trying to get Sasuke to laugh, crack one of his wide grins, or even just talk like he was actually still alive. Of course, between making Sasuke human again, pulling pranks on bullies, and training with Lee, he had very little time to actually study any of the things taught during Iruka's explanations. It probably also didn't help that he was skipping classes with Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba. And so he was almost positive that he had completely failed the test they'd taken yesterday on the uses of Kawamiri Jutsu. He turned to look at the boy who sat one seat away from him. His hands were resting just in front of his mouth, as he stared blankly at the front of the classroom. It was like this every day. Sasuke would brood, Naruto would either try to make him laugh or pick a fight with him, then Sakura and the fangirls would show up to fight about the coveted seat next to Sasuke. Then Naruto would pull Sakura into the seat and dodge angry fangirls for the rest of the day. Hey Naruto, move over. Naruto looked up slightly surprised. Sakura was standing there, arriving much earlier than she ever did. Shaking himself from his slight shock, he stood up and moved, allowing Sakura to take the seat between him and Sasuke. Good morning Sasuke-kun, Sakura said as soon as she sat down. Sasuke answered with an annoyed, "HN." Before resuming his brooding, Sakura gave a sigh, and turned to face Naruto. She was thankful for his presence, since it gave her someone to talk to while her mind worked on new ways of breaking through Sasuke's indifferent attitude. Hey Naruto, figured I'd come early today and spare you Ino's wrath. She said, giggling slightly. Naruto gave a grin in return. Hey, thanks Sakura-chan. He silently wondered why none of the other fangirls had tried something like that. Not that he was complaining. Aside from Ino and Sakura, the other fangirls were, well in Naruto's mind, and Sasuke's, though he'd never admit it, they were the most concentrated source of evil since the Kyuubi. After a few minutes, the rest of the class finally came in. The Sasuke fangirls were outraged to find they had been beaten to the punch by one of their biggest rivals, but were quickly silenced by Iruka, who had come in with the rest of the class. Alright Mina, I got your tests graded, so we'll pass those back before beginning today's instruction. Iruka said, going to each desk. Naruto groaned. His test was of course a failure, but it was even worse than he had thought. At this rate, his grades might not even be good enough to allow him to continue to next year, when their class would take the genin exams. Iruka began his rather simple lecture on the art of deflecting thrown weapons with a kunai. When the time for lunch finally came, he turned to his class with a smile. Alright, everyone can go to lunch. When we come back we'll start back in on our handseal practice. Oh, and Naruto and Sakura, I need to see you before you go to lunch. This was a surprise. People were used to Naruto having to speak with Iruka the day after a test, but Sakura. She had the best grades in the class. Did the brain of the academy finally fail a test? For obvious reasons, the fangirl clique found this to be a highly amusing idea. Naruto walked up to Iruka's desk, Sakura following behind him nervously. What's up, sensei? Naruto asked while giving Iruka a large grin. Don't. What's up, sensei? Me, Naruto. This is the 5th test you've failed so far. If you keep this up, I'm not going to be able to allow you to continue to next year's classes. I'm glad you agree, Naruto. That's what I wanted to talk to the two of you about. Iruka said, sitting down behind his desk. Sakura, I was wondering if you'd consider tutoring Naruto from now on after class. Sakura gave an inward sigh of relief. She wasn't in trouble. Far from it, it seemed like she was being asked a favor by her teacher. Ha, Iruka-sensei himself realizes how smart I am. Inner Sakura cheered. Sakura thought it over for a few moments. Naruto was kind of her friend. And she'd hate to see him fail. But it would also take time away from hanging out, stalking, with Sasuke-kun. Naruto replied first. Sensei, you can't ask that of Sakura. How can you expect her to waste her time tutoring me? That's just not fair. Naruto, your grades are dangerously low, and Sakura is our best student. I'm sure if anyone here can help you keep up, it'll be her. Sakura smiled, both at Iruka's compliment and at the fact that Naruto was trying to give her an out. It's alright, Naruto, she said, coming to a decision by then. I'd be happy to tutor you. We can't have our loudmouth ninja not become a genin now, can we? Naruto smiled at her. In truth, he was touched that she'd be willing to do something like this. He knew he shouldn't be so surprised though. He knew despite her sometimes obnoxious fangirl personality, deep down she was still the same sweet little girl he'd back then. Alright, Sakura-chan, if you're sure, then I'd be happy for the help. He said, grinning widely at the pink-haired girl. Iruka smiled himself. Great. Glad to hear it. You're more than welcome to use this classroom and the academy training grounds, just make sure not to make a mess, okay? The last part obviously directed at Naruto, who gave a sheepish grin before nodding. Alright then, why don't you two go off to lunch then? The two nodded, and headed out of the classroom. Once in the hallway, they spotted Ino, Sakura's best friend and rival. She was leaning against the wall, obviously waiting. She smirked when they finally came out. So forehead, is it true that you actually failed a test? Ino said. Not that she really believed it, but it was fun to push her best friend's buttons. PFF'd. Of course not, pig. Sensei was asking me to tutor Naruto after class from now on. Ino looked at Naruto. Ah, I'm sorry, Naruto. Now you have to spend even more time with Sakura. She said, eyeing her friend mischievously. Naruto smiled, and shook his head. Not at all, I love spending time with Sakura-chan. He said, sincerity in his voice. Sakura tried not to blush, but the grin that Ino gave her showed she wasn't succeeding. Whatever. Let's just go have lunch. She said, stomping away. Ino smiled, and stuck her tongue out at Naruto, before chasing after her friend. Leaving a very confused Naruto. So, now that you get to spend all this time with Naruto, are you going to ask him? Ino asked as she took a bite of her onigiri. Sakura looked at the rice ball in her hands. I'm not sure. I mean, thinking back on it, I'm almost sure it was him, but, she trailed off, not certain what it was she was trying to say. Ino gave an annoyed sigh. But what? If it was Naruto who helped you back then, the least you could do is tell him thank you. She said, before her eyes took on a dreamy look. Just imagine, a young girl being picked on, before being saved by a mysterious boy, her knight in shining armor. Who then disappears only to come back into her life a year later. It's so romantic. At this, Ino gave a slight squeal. Sakura's eye twitched at her friend's imagination. Baka. I don't like Naruto like that. If it was him, then I do want to say thank you, but I didn't treat him very well when we met again, you know. To make matters worse, I'm pretty sure it was him every time the bullies got scared away. So what do I say now? Hey, thanks for helping me have a decent childhood by getting rid of the people who picked on me, Sorry I treated you like crap the last 6 months. Sakura gave a depressed sigh, before taking a bite out of the rice ball. At least now I can help him out, even just a little. After class was over that day, Naruto spent an hour with Sakura. They went over his Kawamiri Jutsu test, and she helped explain to him exactly what was wrong with his answers. By the time they were finished, Naruto felt confident enough in his knowledge of the Kawamiri. Thanks a bunch, Sakura-chan. I would have never understood half of that without you explaining it like you did, he said, beaming his grin at her. Sakura just smiled in return. It's no problem, Naruto, I'm happy to help out. He looked at the clock, before turning to face his new tutor. Nay, Sakura-chan, I have an hour before I'm supposed to meet Lee for training, you want to go get some ramen with me? Sakura looked at him, before she narrowed her eyes mischievously. You mean like a date? She asked in a teasing tone. Naruto blushed. No, I mean, Naruto tried to stutter out an answer. Deciding not to torture him any longer, she giggled at his display. Sure, Naruto, but you're paying, got it? Naruto nodded, glad to be off the spot. He's too easy, inner Sakura said. She knew she'd never be able to forget the horror. How someone as small as Naruto could pack away that many bowls of ramen that fast, maybe he had a storage seal in his throat. She was still on her first bowl, while Naruto was currently working on his fourth. For his part, Naruto was going on about his attempts to make Sasuke smile again between bites. Sakura had found herself surprised to know that Naruto and Sasuke had been something akin to friends before. It seemed that the loudmouth blonde had taken it as his personal mission to get the Uchiha prodigy out of his current brooding state. And then Akamaru bit Shikamaru's butt. The great thing was, you couldn't even hear him say something about it being troublesome with all the geese squawking. Naruto said, finishing his story of his latest practical joke aimed at getting Sasuke to smile. Sakura laughed. It was something that came very easily when hanging out with Naruto, she found. She'd probably laughed more in the 2 hours they'd spent in each other's company today than she had the entire month previous. As Naruto went back to finishing off his bowl of ramen, she thought back to the conversation she and Ino had at lunch. Should I say something about it? What are you being so hesitant for? Ask him already, said a very impatient inner Sakura. Hey Naruto, can I ask you something? Naruto swallowed a mouthful of noodles before responding. Sure, Sakura-chan, what is it? Her hesitation grew, but she fought past it. When you were younger, did you save me from some bullies? Naruto's face broke into a huge grin. You remembered. Man, I thought after I saw you in class the first time that you had forgotten completely about it. She frowned. In all honesty, I did. Well, kind of. I remembered someone dumping a trash can on them, and then running away with me. But I couldn't remember what their name was or what they looked like. It was actually Ino who said you looked a lot like the guy who saved me that day. Naruto nodded. I see. Hey old man, can I have? His sentence was cut off when he felt something warm against his cheek. He turned with wide eyes to look at a madly blushing Sakura, who muttered a quick thank you and goodbye before dashing away from the curtains. Tuki, the owner of Ichiraku Ramen, looked on in amusement as his favorite customer sat there with his mouth hanging open. It seemed as though his entire body had seized up from that one little action. So Naruto, you didn't tell me that girl was your. He held up his pinky finger. Naruto's mind decided that that was simply too much, before shutting down, causing Naruto to faint. Sakura ran all the way to her house, locking herself in her room when she finally got there. Looking in the mirror, she saw her face was doing an awfully good impression of a tomato. I can't believe I did that. Did you see the look on his face? That was adorable. Next time we should kiss him on the lips. I bet he'd faint if we did something like that. Inner Sakura said, not realizing how close to the truth she was. Sakura shook her head, trying to dispel the thought. Naruto was a friend, And now that she was sure he had been the one to help her that time, he was definitely a good friend. But Sasuke was the only one she'd have those kids of thoughts about. Still, she couldn't get over how smooth his skin had felt. Her blush died down, and she giggled to herself, remembering the shell-shocked look on his face. She found herself agreeing with her inner self. That look on his face was adorable. Lee looked on in concern for his best friend. When Naruto had arrived at the training grounds, he'd seemed a little off. Now that they were sparring, Lee knew he was more than just a little off. It was like he wasn't even really there. His body just going through the motions while his mind was doing something else. Finally getting bored of the one-sided sparring, he held up his hand to signal a break. Naruto-kun, are you sure everything is alright? You seem unfocused today. Are you sick? Naruto shook his head, trying to clear it of the fog that had descended upon his brain since the incident at the ramen stand. No, Lee, I just had something surprising happen today, that's all. Lee noticed Naruto's cheeks turn slightly red as he said that. Come on, let's keep sparring, I've gotta even the score. He said with a grin, letting Lee know that he was back to normal. Lee nodded, before charging towards his friend. Naruto responded with a low sweeping kick, trying to take Lee's feet out. Lee jumped over Naruto's leg, and landed behind him, spinning to deliver a kick to his friend's back. Naruto, however, ducked lower and continued with his sweeping motion, taking Lee's legs out from underneath him. Lee fell, but used his arms to propel himself right back up, landing gracefully before engaging Naruto in hand-to-hand. Lee's punches came furiously fast, with Naruto countering as best as he could. He knew even on his best days that he wouldn't be able to keep up with Lee in pure taijutsu. So taking a chance, he let one of Lee's punches get through. Lee's eyes widened in surprise as he broke through Naruto's guard, only to feel a sick crunch beneath his fist. He calmed down though, when he saw a log poof into place where his friend was only a moment before. Turning around, he jumped to the side to dodge 3 blunted shuriken. Lee smiled, while Naruto grinned back. They were both getting faster and stronger. And now, thanks to a little help from Sakura, Naruto had a new jutsu under his control. That thought brought forth the whole ramen incident once again, but he shook his head to clear it. He'd think about that later. For now, he had training with his best friend. The end of his 3rd year at the academy was approached by Naruto with a sense of dread. Not because of the every-trying final exam. His tutoring by Sakura had produced exceptional results, and while he knew he'd never be an academic champion, he'd still pass if he focused. No, the end of the year was depressing because soon he'd be losing his training partner. Lee would be graduating, and while the two swore they'd still be friends, they knew their time training together had come to an end. Lee would soon be too busy with missions and team training. Not that Naruto begrudged him that or knew what the word begrudged meant. Honestly, he was really happy that his friend would begin the path that would lead to his dream. The problem was that his training with Lee had also been an escape for him. He would spend his time improving with his friend, enjoying the company, and avoid the hateful attitude of the village at the same time. Luckily, he still had a couple of months until the end of the academic year. He'd just have to enjoy the remaining time he had left. At least I'll still be able to study with Sakura-chan after class, he mused. His pink-haired friend, yes, he could safely say she was his friend now, was a source of confusion for the young boy. They'd spend hours either studying, or just making small talk. But the moment Ino or Sasuke entered the picture, it was almost like Sakura would become 2 different people. She'd go from helping Naruto to knocking him to the floor over something he said, and then would apologize, and help him to his feet. He couldn't help but sometimes wonder if there was anything wrong with his friend. Another source of female confusion for him came in the form of one Hinata Hyuga. The girl had been in the same class as him since he'd entered the academy, but they'd never really spoken to each other. As a matter of fact, the few times they'd been sparring partners in class, The girl had promptly fainted when Naruto wished her good luck. Despite their lack of interaction in class, however, Naruto couldn't even count the number of times he'd seen her around town. At Ichiraku's, around his apartment, even near the Hokage's tower or his and Lee's training spot. Of course, every time she'd noticed that he'd seen her, her face would turn red and she'd faint again. He'd carried her home because of that at least 17 times so far. Her father, who although a bit stuck up always treated Naruto with respect, would view these occurrences with a strange mix of humor and disgust. At least the third girl he was familiar with had the decency to be predictable. Ino was always easy to understand. She had a crush on Sasuke, she called Sakura forehead girl, and was the only other person in class as loud as him or Kiba. Alright class, that's it for today. Remember, next week we'll be having a practical exam on your taijutsu. Also, it's only a month until the final exam, so don't slack off on your studies. Iruka gathered his own belongings after dismissing the class for the day. He watched as all but 2 students filed out, leaving Naruto and Sakura. Iruka smiled, and nodded at the pair before heading out himself. So Naruto, what did you want to go over today? Naruto shrugged. I think I got most of today's lecture. I still need to work on the henge, but I can do that on my own. Actually, I was going to ask you if you'd like help for once, on your taijutsu. Sakura thought about it for a moment. While she was academically at the top of the class, her taijutsu was subparts at best. Still. But Naruto, you almost failed last year's taijutsu exam, remember? If you want to practice, we should probably find a better trainer. Naruto grinned. Hey, I've improved a lot since then. I bet my taijutsu is better than anyone's in the class. Sakura rolled her eyes at the statement. It was so typically Naruto. Your taijutsu probably doesn't even come close to Sasuke-kun's. The probably was a true testament to their friendship. A year ago it would have been replaced by a, definitely. Naruto's grin grew even wider at that. Oh yeah, wanna make a bet on it? Sakura found herself matching his grin. Fine then, if you don't beat Sasuke-kun during our taijutsu exam, then you have to wear one of Ino's I Heart Sasuke shirts around for a week. The blonde shinobi in training grimaced. Ino had made the laciest purple shirt possible, and printed I Heart Sasuke in big pink letters on the front, while the back had a close-up picture of Sasuke's face. The shirt had been voted unanimously, by Naruto and Kiba, to be the most horrific piece of clothing to ever be spawned from the pits of hell. Fine then, he said finally, but if I beat Sasuke, he had to stop and think. What would be as humiliating as wearing one of Ino's evil incarnate shirts without being too mean? Then you have to henge to look like you're wearing one of those shirts, only it has to say I Heart Naruto and has to be orange. Sakura blushed slightly and laughed. Fine, it's not like you're going to beat Sasuke anyways. Naruto's grin was back on his face. We'll see, Sakura-chan. Now, how about we practice and work on your taijutsu? Sakura felt more than slightly nervous the day of the taijutsu exam. Not because she wasn't ready. On the contrary, Naruto's pointers and advice had increased her confidence in her own taijutsu skill to where she felt like it was adequate. She hadn't realized he'd improved that much. If she had, she might have given making that bet a second thought. She still wasn't sure if he'd be able to beat Sasuke, but now she wasn't sure he wouldn't either. Alright class, everyone partner up and take one of the rings in the field. The instructors and I will be watching and grading your performances. Remember, this is a taijutsu exam, so no ninjutsu or genjutsu. I don't think I should have to say it, but no killing your opponent. Everyone understand? Iruka looked out on the class, who gave various nods or answers of, "Hi sensei." The students began breaking up into pairs. Sakura stood across from her sometimes best friend and rival Ino. Ino looked at her pink-haired opponent and smirked. Nervous forehead girl, she taunted, assuming her friend rival was nervous about the exam. Sakura glared back at Ino. You wish Ino pig. She shifted into the standard Academy Taijutsu stance, and waited for the call to begin. As she waited, she cast a glance around the field. Sure enough, Naruto had partnered up with Sasuke. He had his big, I can take on the world smile on his face, and Sasuke was smirking. Ino followed Sakura's line of sight and gaped. It wasn't unusual for Naruto to fight Sasuke. He was the only person in the class who would actually voluntarily fight the prodigy. But she'd never seen Sasuke with anything but a scowl on his face. On their side of the field, Naruto and Sasuke were impatiently waiting for the call to begin. So you're serious? You're really going to wear that shirt when you lose? Sasuke asked, referring to the wager his not-friend told him he'd made with Sakura. Of course. But I'm not going to lose. Naruto replied idly. Sasuke had to fight down a chuckle at Naruto's exuberance. And the thought of him wearing one of Ino's shirts of evil. Of course, his mirth was short-lived as thoughts of his brother once again intruded his mind. His scowl returned full force, remembering that night. He didn't have time for amusement or friends. He needed to get stronger so that he could seek out his brother, and then. Hajime. The call to begin snapped Sasuke out of his thoughts just in time to dodge away from a punch thrown by Naruto. When did he get so fast? He thought, rolling to the side to avoid a kick. He grabbed one of Naruto's arms and threw him to the side, taking a moment to orient himself. Naruto rolled to his feet and sprang back at him. Used to his surprising speed now, Sasuke was ready for him. Knocking his punch to the side, Sasuke swung his leg up towards his chest. Naruto crouched beneath it, and kicked out at Sasuke's leg, trying to sweep it out from underneath him. Sasuke fell, but caught himself, using his hands to brace himself and then springing back up. He brought his foot down, attempting to hit Naruto in the head with his heel. Naruto jumped to the side, barely dodging the kick. But as he did, Sasuke pivoted, kicking Naruto in the side. Naruto rolled a few feet away, and stood to face Sasuke. Both were wearing identical expressions on their faces. Excitement, enjoyment, and a want to beat the other. The brief peace was broken as the two leapt at each other again, entering into a furious set of attacks and counters. Iruka stared at the fight in disbelief. He didn't trust the other instructors to grade Naruto fairly, so he always took the job himself. Now, he was witnessing his top student, and the former dead last, fight with speed and skill that was far above an average academy student. He was so amazed that he didn't even realize that the other students had finished, and that everyone was now gathered around Sasuke and Naruto's fight. Go Sasuke-kun. Annihilate that twerp. Some girl from the class shouted. Come on Naruto. Show that arrogant bastard who's boss. This came from Kiba, one of Naruto's occasional friends. The fight lasted another 10 minutes. Sasuke was able to get more hits in, but thanks to Naruto's incredible stamina they were about even. They stood for a moment, staring at each other and breathing heavily. They were both covered in dirt, with multiple bruises and scratches. Yet they were still smiling despite their fatigue. Then, at some unseen signal, they sped towards each other. Arms drawn back to deliver what they both knew would be their final attack. They met in the center of the ring, and threw their punches. Everyone stood silent, as time seemed to slow around the two fighters. Their fists flew towards the other's head. The silence was broken by a loud crack, before the class broke into excited pandemonium for the end of the fight. The next day the class could not stop laughing, much to Sakura's chagrin. Not that she could blame them. If the circumstances had been just a little different, she would be laughing right along with them. Naruto sat in his usual seat next to Sakura. He was wearing the frilliest, purplest, most girly and evil article of clothing he had ever seen in his life. Yet he still had that grin on his face. The fight had been close, coming down simply to the fact that Sasuke's longer reach got Naruto before his own punch was delivered. Iruka had awarded both of them full marks on the exam, saying it was one of the most impressive examples of taijutsu he'd ever seen from academy students. The class was just surprised that someone had come so close to beating Sasuke. Sasuke even came up to him and said, "Good spar Dobi." Sakura almost felt bad about making Naruto wear the shirt, but he just laughed when Ino handed it to him. "Hey, I might have lost this time, but next time I'll beat Sasuke for sure." This time only the die-hard Sasuke fangirl scoffed at his declaration. Surprisingly, this didn't include Sakura or Ino. A month and a half passed since Naruto came to school wearing the purple monstrosity. This year's final was less than 2 weeks away, and Naruto was starting to feel nervous about his chances of passing. Sakura, his friend and tutor, had come down with a bad case of the flu. She'd been gone for the past week, a time when Naruto could have seriously used her help. Iruka's lessons on chakra control and its application in everything from jutsus to increasing their physical capabilities made absolutely no sense to him. He couldn't even remember the name of the holes on the body that could expel chakra. Worst of all, Iruka made it very clear that a big portion of the final would be over chakra control, as it was a staple to a ninja's daily life. Naruto had no doubt Sakura would catch up on the information when she came back, but he was pretty sure she wouldn't have the time to help him catch up too. When the class was finally dismissed for the day, Naruto stood up and headed for the door. He was planning on bringing Sakura some soup today. Sure, she said she didn't like ramen as much as he did, but he still swore that it had to have some type of miracle healing qualities. How else could you explain how he never got sick? However, as he stood to leave, he was stopped by a voice calling out. "Hey Runt, stay where you are." He turned to see Ino glaring at him. He gave her a perplexed look as she walked over to his desk. "Alright, Sakura asked me to try and help you with this chakra control stuff while she's sick. I'd rather not, but I owe her a couple of favors so." Ino just shrugged as though to say, "What can you do?" Naruto smiled at the fellow blonde. "Thanks Ino, I appreciate it, but you don't have to. I'm sure you've got more important things to do." Ino nodded. "Sakura said you'd say something like that, and told me to tell you." Ino changed the pitch of her voice, doing her best impression of Sakura, which wasn't very good. "Naruto, you better accept this gorgeous flowers," I.e. called her a pig, "help. I'm not going to have you fail just because I got sick." Naruto smiled. "Hey, okay then, I'd appreciate anything you could help me with Ino." "Alright then, what don't you understand about the chakra control lessons?" she asked. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. "Just about all of it." Ino face faulted. She just knew this was going to be, in Shikamaru's words, troublesome. A few hours later, they had made some progress. He now understood the concept behind the beginnings of the chakra control lessons, even if he could perform them himself. Not for lack of trying. He and Ino had spent the better part of the past hour trying to get the exercise down for him, with varying results. Naruto finally sighed, sitting back down. "Hey, Ino-chan, I think we should call it quits for today. It's getting pretty late, and I think we've gotten enough done." He waited for a moment for a response, before turning to look at his replacement tutor. She was leaning forward on the desk, her head lying on her arms. She had a peaceful smile on her face, obviously enjoying whatever she was dreaming. He smiled to himself. It was cute to see her like that. She was normally so noisy and bossy, it was refreshing to see her peaceful. Not wanting to break the tranquil atmosphere, he lifted Ino out of her chair, carrying her in his arms. Ino mumbled something incoherent, before nuzzling into Naruto's chest. He fought down a blush, and headed out of the classroom. He leapt across the rooftops as gently as such an act could allow. He didn't want to take the streets in case one of the villagers decided to accost him. He figured he was doing a good enough job as Ino didn't stir. He finally landed in front of the Yamanaka flower shop, and walked inside. "Hey, anyone here?" he asked in a voice just barely above a whisper. "Oh, sorry, I was in the back. How can I help yo?" The blonde-haired man who had appeared from the back door was looking between Naruto and the sleeping girl in his arms. Excuse me, but why are you carrying my daughter? Naruto gave an inward sigh of relief. It looked like this man either didn't know who he was, which was rather doubtful, as his whisker-like birthmarks and orange clothing made it pretty clear, or didn't hate him for his mere existence. He hoped it was the latter, but would place his bet on the former. Sorry. She was tutoring me after class, and I think she used up a bit too much chakra or something cause she fell asleep. So I figured I should bring her home. The man smiled. Ah, I see. Thank you very much, I'm sure my daughter would appreciate it. I'm Inoichi, by the way. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto introduced himself, hoping it wouldn't change the man's friendly attitude. The man smiled, taking Ino from Naruto. She seemed to be snuggled pretty close to you, Naruto-kun. Tell me, is my daughter you? He held up his pinky finger. Naruto noticed the man had a mischievous glint in his eye, but behind it was something dangerous. Natural fatherly overprotective tendencies. Not that Naruto recognized it as such. He shook his head while waving his arms in front of him wildly. No, sir. We're just classmates. Oh, you carried her over 3 miles home without waking her because she's your classmate. He was genuinely amused now by the boy's flustered attitude. Naruto's face set in determination. Of course, I'm going to be Hokage someday, so I have to protect and take care of everyone. I would have helped Ino-chan home even if she was a complete stranger. Inoichi's raised an eyebrow, more from the honorific the boy had used with his daughter's name than the declaration of becoming the most powerful ninja in the village. Is that so? Well, with that kind of attitude you'll make a great Hokage someday. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go put my daughter in her bed. It was nice to meet you, Naruto-kun, and thank you for doing such a nice thing for my daughter. Naruto nodded and waved goodbye as he turned to leave the store. No problem. And tell Ino-chan I said thanks for the help. Later. With that he walked out and jumped up to the rooftops. He still had training with Lee after all. Ino awoke a few hours later feeling strangely displaced. It was strange because she recognized her bed in her room, but it felt like she shouldn't be there. The last thing she remembered was watching Naruto try to get the hang of a chakra control lesson. So how did I get back home? She said to herself. That Uzumaki kid carried you here. She turned to see her father standing in the doorway. Naruto did? Ino asked in surprise. Inoichi nodded. Sure did. So, why didn't you tell me the two of you were dating? Ino's mouth dropped, before she shot out of bed, her face coloring an angry red. Wah, us. Did he say? I don't even like him like that. Oh, when I get my hands on that run all. She broke off her plotting of Naruto's slow and painful death when she recognized the sound of her father's laughter. He was leaning against the doorway, miming wiping tears from his eye. Sorry honey, I couldn't resist. Naruto didn't tell me you were dating. I just figured I should tease you since I teased him about it after he brought you here. Ino calmed down and groaned. It was just like her father too. Wait, you teased Naruto about the two of us dating? She shouted in embarrassment. Inoichi nodded his head, as though nothing was wrong and his daughter would not be having to embarrassingly avoid Naruto for weeks on end because of this. Sure did. Now come on, Ino. Dinner is almost ready. With that he turned and left the room, leaving a fuming and mortally embarrassed Ino behind. By the next week Sakura was back and life continued as normal, with the exception of Ino making it a point to go nowhere near Naruto, which incidentally meant nowhere near Sasuke. The finals were drawing ever closer, but thanks to the help he'd received from Ino and Sakura, he was confident he'd pass. Today Lee would be taking his Genin exam. Naruto would be taking his final the next day. At the same time Lee would be meeting with his Junin sensei. Afterwards, the two had agreed to meet up for one final training session together, before Lee began his busy life as a Genin of Konoha. When the class was released for the day, Naruto rushed out to find his friend. Lee was sitting in the hallway, a smile on his face and a Konoha Hittite on his forehead. Naruto gave a whoop of joy and smacked Lee on the back. Awesome. You passed, congratulations, Lee. Lee's smile grew even wider. Many thanks, my friend. It was hard, but with our training, I was able to pass. Naruto nodded. He felt so happy for his friend it was like his head was going to burst. Come on, Lee. Let's go get some ramen to celebrate, my treat. The next day passed in a blur for Naruto. His exam was over and done with before he could blink. He passed, with a score just below Ino, right above the average score. Sakura, of course, passed with a perfect score, much to Ino's dismay. Aha, I win, Piggy. That means you have to pay for our trip to the hot springs today. Sakura said. Ino sighed. Fine, fine, forehead girl. I don't know why I made that stupid bet with you in the first place. Her friend shrugged the comment off. You should have known better. Even if I missed a week of class, I'm still smarter than you. She said, sticking her tongue out. Naruto watched on in amusement as the friends started bickering. It was an everyday occurrence, but it was still funny to him. He shrugged it off and headed out of the classroom. Once outside, he began sprinting towards the training ground. Lee and he had said they'd meet up for their final training session, jumping up to travel along the rooftops when the streets got too crowded. Lee was waiting for him, a smile on his face even bigger than when he had been given his Hittite. Naruto, my friend, you will never guess the amazing news I have. My Junin sensei is none other than Guy Maeda, the man who I met at the training grounds that one day. Naruto smiled. That's great, Lee. Just his suggestions improved our training, so I'll bet you'll get way stronger with him actually training you. His friend nodded in eager agreement. I hope so. I can't wait to see what training he has in store. Just thinking about it makes burn with the passion of youth. Naruto quirked an eyebrow at this. Does that hurt or something? Lee laughed, assuming Naruto was trying to be funny. Then his face took on a semi-serious expression. All right, Naruto. Are you ready to see just how much we've improved since we met? A grin broke out on Naruto's face. You betcha. And remember, whoever loses has to pay the other's tab at Ichiraku. Lee gulped. While he ate quite a bit of ramen, it was nowhere near the amount that Naruto consumed. His tab would not be cheap. Alright. The rules are taijutsu only. The first person to be incapacitated loses, and pays the other's tab. Anything else? Naruto shook his head. Nope. That sounds good enough to me. Let's get started. They took up position at opposite ends of the training ground, obviously eager to test their skills. Ready. Naruto called out. Lee nodded. 1. Lee began the countdown. 2. Naruto's face held a smirk that would not have looked out of place on the face of a certain Uchiha. 3. The two shouted as they ran towards the other. Lee was faster and surprised Naruto with a jump kick to his chest. Naruto went flying towards a tree, but used his momentum to flip around and rebound off. He flew at Lee, attempting to land a punch. Lee dodged to the side, and rammed his knee into Naruto and ending his flight. Naruto jumped back to his feet and started a barrage of punches, getting a few good hits in on Lee. Lee jumped back as Naruto tried to kick him. He ran forward, ramming into Naruto who was still open from the kick. Naruto gave a grunt and grabbed onto one of Lee's arms, throwing him over his shoulder and into the tree that he had bounced from earlier. Lee stood up, and the two stared at each other for a moment, before rushing forward. Punches and kicks flew as fast as they could throw them. Lee's speed was definitely being used to its fullest potential, as he would block and counter faster than Naruto could block. Naruto's strength, however, made his punches just a bit harder. After a few minutes of this, the two broke away from each other, gasping for breath. Your strength has improved greatly, Naruto. Lee said between breaths. Yeah, well, you're almost too fast for me to hit. Naruto replied, smiling at his friend. The two stood there regaining their breath for a few seconds. Then without another word they immediately launched themselves into another attack. Lee attempted to grab Naruto, who ducked under his reach. Naruto kicked up at Lee's chest, sending him slightly into the air. Naruto ran towards the tree and launched himself off it, heading straight for Lee, who was just starting to land back on his feet. Lee's hand shot out just in time and grabbed onto Naruto's leg, spinning around in place. Lee realized he had an opportunity to end the battle, and so using the force of Naruto's jump, spun faster and faster, holding onto Naruto's leg. Lee, cut it out. I'm getting dizzy, Naruto said, not quite sure which direction was up anymore. Lee smiled. Sure thing, Naruto, he said, letting go of Naruto's leg. The blonde-haired ninja in training went flying high above the treetops. Lee stared for a few moments at the spot where he last saw his friend before his flight took him out of his view. Oh, perhaps I was a little overzealous in that last attack. Wait for me, Naruto, Lee called out as he ran towards the direction Naruto went flying. As Naruto went sailing over the village of Konoha, he took time to think. Mainly about ramen. He kind of wondered exactly when he would land, but it was mostly ramen. After all, a fall from this height would surely knock him out, if not kill him. So he figured he should get to the ramen thoughts while he still had time. Aho! He turned to his left and saw a crow flying by. He shrugged. Man, Lee really overdid it this time. This fall alone might kill me. He said to no one in particular, since there was no one else flying through the air near him. After a few more moments, he finally felt himself slow down and begin to descend. Oi, this is going to hurt. He closed his eyes, and awaited the impact. Instead, he heard a splash, followed by what sounded like a scream, and was submerged in warm water. Of course, not having taken a breath before his impromptu dive, he was lacking in oxygen. He swam quickly up to the surface, panting for air when he reached it. Geez, remind me to never do that again, he said, floating as he got his breath back. Naruto, what the heck just happened? Are you alright? He heard the familiar voice of his pink-haired friend. He turned around smiling, but his face quickly turned to one of shock. Standing behind him in nothing but a towel was Sakura, Ino, and even Hinata. He stared for a few moments, his mouth opening and closing but failing to make words. Sakura gave him a strange look, before realizing exactly what he was looking at. The look immediately turned to one that promised pain for any male in the vicinity. Naruto, she said, her face turning red. The tone in her voice knocking Naruto out of his daze. She took a step toward him, cracking her knuckles as she prepared to use Naruto as her personal punching bag. Wait, Sakura-chan. It was an accident, I swear. Lee threw me through the air and I landed here. I didn't see anything, he said, waving his arms around as he backed away from the girl who was actually seething killer intent. That's when things went from bad to worse, with the arrival of Lee. Ah, there you are, Naruto. Lee's voice came from beyond the fence. With a leap he was over it, smiling at his friend. I was afraid you might have gotten seriously hurt, but it seems that you're. Lee drifted off as he took notice of the three red-faced girls, two of which looked like they were about to start using every kinjutsu known to man, and probably a few that weren't. Lee didn't get a chance to react to this, as he rocketed back into the fence from what could only be described as the worst bloody nose ever. Naruto looked at his unconscious friend, and then back at the girls in front of him. Ino had joined Sakura now, and they both drew back their fists. After leaving the hospital, Naruto and Lee headed towards Ichiraku Ramen. Naruto couldn't really remember much of what happened after Lee fainted, but when he woke up he was in the hospital, with nothing more than a few scratches. Lee, on the other hand, suffered from a few broken ribs, and a black eye, as well as minor blood loss. Naruto didn't focus on that, however. What happened to Lee had given him an idea. An idea so potentially powerful that even thinking about it made him antsy. He'd have to try it out, but not until the time was right. After all, a ninja can't give away all his secrets now, can he? So, I guess the match ended in a draw, huh? Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Lee grinned in response. I guess so. But we should still celebrate with some ramen. It will be my treat, since I did cause the incident and all. Naruto jumped up in excitement. Ignoring the strange looks he was receiving from those passing by, he grabbed Lee by the arm and sped down the road to Ichiraku. As the beginning of the new academy year approached, Naruto began to feel woefully unprepared. He hadn't had any taijutsu practice since the hot spring incident. And while he had mastered his new secret move after some research, it still didn't make him feel like he was going to be ready for the last and supposedly toughest year of his ninja studies. He knew that Sakura would help him with the academic part, but what was he going to do without a training partner? He had even grown desperate enough to ask Sasuke if he'd be willing to spar with him on occasion. Sasuke, being his normal bright and cheery self, said he had better things to do before walking off. So here he was at his normal training grounds, with nothing to do. He'd already practiced his forms, and he had done a bit of shadow boxing, but without an opponent he knew he'd never really improve. Fortunately, his ninja skills had not dulled with the absence of taijutsu training. He easily picked up the sound of someone walking towards the training grounds. He assumed they weren't trying to hide their presence, given the crunching of leaves he could hear. He turned as he heard a gasp, and found himself looking at a distressed-looking Hinata Hyuga. Naruto was about to give her a normal overly excited greeting, when he saw the look on her face and how red her eyes were. Hinata, is something wrong? He asked. Hinata's mind immediately went blank. She hadn't even been paying attention to where she was going. And to be here, alone with Naruto of all people. Finally shaking herself out of her daze, she managed a small smile. It's nothing Naruto-kun, I'm fine. Naruto narrowed his eyes in thought. Are you sure? It looks like you've been crying. If there's something wrong, you can tell me, Hinata. Hinata looked at the ground for a few moments. Without looking up, she began telling him what had happened. I was training with my father today, to help me prepare for the last year at the academy. While we were training, I tripped and fell down. My father called me weak and told me he had no time to waste on a worthless girl like me. She could feel herself tearing up as his harsh words replayed themselves through her head, but struggled to keep from crying. She couldn't let Naruto think she was weak too. She didn't know what she'd do if that ever happened. She was saved from the thinking about it when she heard a growling sound. She looked up and saw something she'd never seen before, a very angry Naruto. He was actually growling, and from where she was standing, his eyes almost looked red. That bastard. I'm gonna go kick his for talking to you like that, Naruto said, getting ready to jump out of the clearing. Hinata gasped. No one had ever called her father a bastard, especially not due to the way he treated his eldest child. Naruto-kun, you can't. My father is very strong and he's the head of our clan. There's no way you could. I mean she began to stammer off, fidgeting with her fingers. Naruto calmed down a little from the display. Although he didn't want to admit it, Hinata's unspoken words were true and he knew it. After all, if Hokage was the best ninja in the village, then a clan head must be the best ninja of the clan, right? At least that was his thoughts on the matter. If only he were stronger. And that's when it hit him. Hinata, I've got an idea. What if you trained with me from now on after class? He asked. My last training partner graduated last year, so he's too busy with missions to be able to train. This way we can both get stronger together. And then we'll make your dad eat his words. It was obviously a foolproof plan. In his own mind, Naruto could already see him and Hinata standing over her father's beaten form, victorious grins on their faces. Hinata felt as though time stopped. Naruto was asking her to train with him. She'd see him every day. It was almost like a dream come true. But Naruto-kun, I don't want to hold you back. Hinata could just see herself messing up during training, and the disappointed look that would be in Naruto's eyes just like her father's. The very thought was making her feel empty inside. Naruto noticed the look on her face, and walked up to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and looked directly in her eyes, not even noticing the blush that suddenly crossed her face with his close proximity. Hinata, there's no way you'd hold me back. I bet with you training me I'll become a better ninja in no time. We both will. I believe in you. And there it was. He believed she could help him, that together they could both become great ninjas. She smiled a real smile this time. She wasn't even blushing anymore, even though her heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst through her chest. All right, Naruto-kun, I'd be happy to train with you, she said, without the trace of a stutter. Here it was at last, the final year of the academy. The final exam was only a couple months away. After this, the aspiring young ninjas would become genin, and take their first real step into the world of shinobi. And Naruto was ready to take that step. At least, he thought he was. His studying with Sakura kept his skills up to par, and his training with Lee and then Hinata had kept him physically fit and gave him a practical way to use his skills. Hinata, for her part, had really surprised him. He always knew she was a decent student, but he never really interacted with her much. She seemed really nervous around him for some reason. But after a couple of weeks, she seemed to become more comfortable with him. And it showed in the way she fought. Her movements were graceful, precise and quick. It almost seemed to be the perfect counter for his almost brawling type tactics. This in turn caused him to improve, his strikes becoming quicker and wasting less movement. It almost made him laugh when he thought back to when she said she might hold him back. He wasn't too proud to admit that her taijutsu was better than his, but he was catching up. His training with Lee had given him speed and strength, while his training with Hinata was giving him skill and finesse. So he felt confident that when the end of the year approached, he'd be one of the students walking out of the academy proudly wearing a leaf headband. How could he fail after all? He stood panting for breath as he stared across the training ground at Hinata. They were in yet another sparring session, and both the ninjas to be seemed winded. Hey Hinata, why don't we call it quits for today? It's getting kind of late, Naruto said. Personally, he could have gone on for a while longer yet, but Hinata looked like she was on her last legs. She would never say it, of course. Their first training sessions had almost ended disastrously when near the end Hinata collapsed from exhaustion. After that, Naruto had told her to tell him when she was getting tired, but the Hyuga still seemed intent on pushing herself. Are you sure, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked. Yeah, I'm getting kind of hungry anyways. He smiled, picking up his orange jacket which he had discarded earlier. Hey, I know. You want to get some ramen with me, Hinata? We never really do anything together except train. Naruto-kun wants to get food with me. Like a date, Hinata thought, her face turning red at the thought. Before Naruto even knew what happened, Hinata had fainted. Hinata, Naruto said, walking over to his friend. She seemed okay. Silly girl, you pushed yourself too hard again, he said with a sigh. He bent over and picked her up, carrying her bridal style. Now that I think about it, I don't really know where Hinata lives. What should I do? He shrugged. He didn't have many options. He could ask around, but the thought of what some of the villagers might do if they found him with an unconscious Hinata in his arms quickly squashed that line of thinking. Naruto, my friend, an enthusiastic voice called out. Naruto turned and was very narrowly able to avoid being run down by the one and only Rock Lee. He turned with and looked at his friend with an exasperated expression on his face. Lee, watch where you're going. You almost hit me, Naruto said. Lee's gleeful expression dropped to be replaced by one slightly more serious. My apologies, my friend. I was very excited to see you and the flame of my youth burned out of control. To make up for it, I shall do 400 laps around this training field on my hands, Lee said, before flipping over and landing nimbly on his hands. Naruto stared on in confusion. That's alright, Lee, you don't have to. He was interrupted, however, as a barrage of shuriken shot out from the trees, sticking in the ground all around Lee's hands. Naruto jumped back, clutching Hinata protectively to his chest as his eyes scanned the area for enemies. What he found instead, however, was a girl about his age, with brown hair tied into two buns on top of her head. She wore a pink Chinese-style shirt and black pants, with a Konoha headband tied around her head. She held a few more shuriken in her hand, and was currently glaring at the sheepish-looking Lee. Lee, you idiot. We don't have time for this, we're supposed to be doing a training exercise with Neji and Guy-sensei. She said, scolding the green-clad ninja. Lee flipped back to a standing position. You're right, Tenten. In my youthful exuberance I had forgotten that we were in the middle of a training exercise. He turned to Naruto. I am sorry, my friend, but we will have to catch up another time. Before the last word was even out of his mouth, Lee had already taken off through the trees surrounding the training grounds. Oi, Lee! The girl, Tenten shouted after him. God, I don't know how much longer I can take of this. Tenten said, looking up to the sky as if hoping that some kind deity might help her plight. That was until she realized she wasn't alone in the training area. She looked over at Naruto, and then at Hinata, before a sly grin appeared on her face. Oh, sorry about that. I hope my teammate didn't interrupt you too, she said. Naruto felt the heat rush up to his cheeks. What do you mean? She fainted after we were done training, he said. Tenten's grin grew at that. Oh, and what exactly were you training so hard to make your girlfriend faint, huh? What? Hinata's not my girlfriend, and we were just training. Training, I swear, Naruto said, getting extremely flustered. Tenten started laughing. Okay, fine. Sorry, I was just teasing you. My name's Tenten, she said. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. And this, he said nodding towards Hinata, is Hinata Hyuga, a friend from my class. Oh, she's Neji's cousin, Tenten said. Thinking about it, she had seen her around the compound Neji lived at on occasion. Wait, you know her family? That's great. Can you tell me where she lives? I wanna get her home, but I have no idea, he said, sheepishly grinning. Tenten nodded. Sure thing. Actually, if you want to come with me, her cousin is on the same team as Lee and me. He could probably give you better directions than me. Awesome, thanks, Naruto said. Tenten nodded and jumped off into the forest in the direction Lee had gone earlier, Naruto following behind, with the still unconscious Hinata snuggling closer to him as he went. When they got to the clearing Tenten's team was training in, Naruto was confused. Somehow, he wasn't quite sure how, but Lee had gotten taller. And was wearing a vest. It took him a few moments to realize that the man he was staring at wasn't Lee at all, but someone who looked so close he could be Lee's father. Lee was on the ground, doing push-ups with his thumbs. The man turned his attention from Lee to the two ninjas who had entered the field. Ah, Tenten, you've arrived. With this our youthful team is complete, the man said, seeming to bust at the seams with energy. Tenten just sighed. And who is this youthful young man you've brought along? Tenten opened her mouth to respond, but Lee spoke up first. Guy-sensei, this is the friend I was telling you about, the one who trained with me before I graduated from the academy. His name is Naruto. Guy smiled at Naruto, his teeth seeming to shine light on the blonde. Excellent, I've been looking forward to meeting you, Naruto-kun. I've heard many things about you from my youthful student here. It is a testament to the fires of your youth that you have overcome your burden and still wish to become a shinobi of the leaf. He gave Naruto a thumbs up. At least Naruto assumed that's what he was doing. It was hard to tell with all that light in his eyes. Yeah, thanks, Naruto said. Guy-sensei, what is this burden of Naruto's you speak of? Lee asked, curious about what might trouble his friend. Now Lee, that is a question you shall have to ask of Naruto-kun later. It would not be youthful of me to tell you myself. And it looks like Naruto-kun has something he needs to say. Guy looked over at Naruto, who was glad that the older ninja had finally stopped smiling. So glad, that he almost forgot why he had come here, until Tenten poked him in the side. Oh yeah, Tenten was telling me you have someone from the Hyuga family on your team. I was wondering if they could give me directions to Hinata's house. Naruto lifted Hinata up slightly higher. She fainted while we were training, and I wanted to make sure she got home okay. Guy looked at the young girl in Naruto's arms, and then back up at Naruto. His eyes suddenly teared up, and he put an arm over them as he looked up to the sky. What a display of CAMADARIE. To carry a fallen teammate all the way home, this is the epitome of youthfulness. He shouted. He then turned to Lee, a serious expression on his face. Remember Lee, devotion to your friends and teammates if always important, you must strive to attain the same level of caring and devotion as Naruto-kun. Lee stood up from his push-ups and saluted. Yash, I will become just as devoted as Naruto. He turned and smiled at Tenten, holding his arms out. Here Tenten, I will take you home since you are my friend and teammate. Tenten's eyebrow twitched. Lee, I haven't fainted, and we're supposed to be training, remember? She said, exasperated at her team's antics. HMMPH. It figures that Hinata would need someone to carry her home after training. A new voice said. Naruto looked up to see a boy in the tree above Guy. He had long black hair, and was wearing black shorts with a khaki jacket. His eyes were white just like Hinata's. Oi, what's that supposed to mean? Naruto asked, a little put off by the boy's rude statement. Only the truth. Hinata is destined to be weak. She will never be able to lead the Hyuga clan. The boy said, a smirk on his face. Now Neji, you shouldn't be mean to your cousin. She is younger than you, but she might make an excellent kunoichi. Guy said reprovingly. Neji just shook his head. Fate decides our place in life the day we were born. She will always be weak. Naruto glared up at Neji. Who does this guy think he is? Look, could you just tell me where Hinata lives so I can take her home? Naruto said. Neji shrugged. If you must. I trust you know where the Hokage Tower is. Neji said in his condescending tone. After Naruto nodded, glaring all the while, Neji continued. If you straight from the Hokage Tower and then take a left at the river, and follow it all the way down, it will eventually lead to the Hyuga compound. Naruto nodded. Thanks. Jerk. He thought as he made to leave the field. He stopped and turned back around. Oh, and thanks for the help Tenten. It was nice to meet you Guy-sensei. Lee, we need to have ramen again one of these days. He said, before leaving the clearing. Luckily for Naruto, the person at who he met at the Hyuga compound was very courteous. She even thanked Naruto for bringing Hinata back. All in all, he felt fairly good as he left to find some food. It was odd. It had just been 2 small words, but suddenly the day seemed brighter, the air clearer. He smiled to himself as he walked the familiar path to Ichiraku. Maybe if he was lucky enough, the old man at the ramen stand might even give him a double helping of pork in his ramen. Naruto closed his eyes as he envisioned bowl after bowl of steamy noodle goodness. He was so engrossed in his ramen fantasy that he didn't notice it when he walked right into someone else, tumbling to the ground. OWWW, what happened? He asked, looking around. He looked up to find a pair of legs near his face, wrapped in bandages. He followed the legs to a purple skirt, and finally up to the face of a very angry Ino. Naruto, you idiot. Watch where you're going, she shouted, clocking him on the head. OWWW. Sorry Ino, I'm just really hungry, I wasn't paying attention. You're not hurt, are you? Naruto asked, standing up and offering a hand to Ino. Ino just humphed, before taking his hand and pulling herself up. I'm fine. Geez, you'd walk right through the village walls if you were hungry, wouldn't you? She said, shaking her head slightly. Naruto laughed sheepishly. Hey, you might be right about that. He said, rubbing the back of his head. Here, how about I buy you some ramen to make it up to you? He offered. Ew, ramen, how can you eat that stuff? She asked. What do you mean? Ramen is the greatest food ever. Naruto exclaimed, shocked at that anyone would doubt the greatness of ramen. Nope. Sorry. There's lots of food out there better than ramen. Ino stated matter-of-factly. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Have you ever even had ramen? He asked. Ino shook her head. Of course not. It's just noodle soup. It's full of sodium and fat. He smirked. Then how do you know if it's not the greatest food out there? He asked. Ino just shrugged. Naruto sighed. Come on. Just try it. I'm sure you'll love it once you've had some. The old man at Ichiraku makes the best ramen ever. Ino just sighed, knowing how hard it would be to dissuade the other blonde now. Finally, she got an idea, a small smile forming on her lips. Geez Naruto, I didn't know you wanted to take me on a date that badly. She said. Naruto gawked at her as her tone took on a teasing tone. What should I do? My heart is only for Sasuke-kun, but now another young man has been stricken by my beauty. She said with a dramatic flair, placing the back of her hand to her forehead and looking up to the sky. Naruto blushed slightly. Oh come on Ino, I'm just offering since I knocked you down, and well, now to prove that ramen tastes good. Ino laughed. Alright Naruto, I'll let you treat me to some ramen if it's that important to you. She said. He smiled. Great. I guarantee you'll like it Ino. He said, grabbing her hand and running down the path with Ino in tow. Oi, Naruto slow down, Ino said as she was dragged along. When the two made it to the ramen stand they were greeted by Tuki. My Naruto, she's a cute one. What does she see in a runt like you? The old man asked, causing both blondes to blush. It's not like that old man. Ino's a friend from the academy and I'm trying to show her how great your ramen is. Naruto said. Tuki just laughed. Alright then, I guess I better make this a special order then. I can't let down my number one customer. He said, before turning to cook the food. Ino had finally shaken off her blush, and smelled the food being prepared. She had to admit, it did smell good. So good her stomach gave off a small growl. She blushed and smiled sheepishly at Naruto. Sorry, I'm on a diet so I didn't have much for lunch. She said. Naruto made a face. Why are you on a diet? You almost look too skinny as it is. Besides, how are you gonna have the energy to practice your skills if you don't get enough to eat? Ino shook her head at the blonde. You wouldn't understand Naruto, she said. Naruto just shrugged, and looked back at Tuki who was pouring the broth over the noodles. He almost seemed ready to leap out of his seat as he waited for the food. After what seemed like an eternity, but was really only a few minutes, Tuki set a bowl of ramen in front of both the blondes. Naruto enthusiastically broke his chopstick apart. Itadakimasu, he exclaimed, digging into the food. Ino looked at the food. It didn't look too bad, and it smelled pretty good. She broke apart her chopsticks and took a couple noodles. She took a bite, chewing it over thoughtfully. Naruto stopped his feeding frenzy to look and see what she thought. Ino swallowed the food, and then hung her head. I can't believe it, it's delicious. She said. Naruto smiled. I told ya so, he said, turning back to his own bowl and shoveling the noodles into his mouth. Ino stared at him for a second before she grabbed his arm, causing him to stop. Listen Naruto, when you're eating with a lady, you shouldn't just shovel the food down your throat. Take your time so you don't get it all over the place. She said. Naruto swallowed the food in his mouth and nodded. Hey, sorry Ino. He placed his bowl on the counter and ever so carefully picked up a single noodle, before placing it in his mouth and chewing it very slowly. After a few seconds, he made a big show of swallowing, before dabbing at his face with a napkin. There is that better? He asked, grinning mischievously. Ino burst out laughing at the over-the-top acting. Geez Naruto, you know what I meant. You wouldn't want to eat like that in front of Sakura. She'd kick your butt all the way to the village gates. She said, smiling at him. Naruto laughed. I'll keep that in mind. He said, going back to his ramen, though this time with much better manners. Ino smiled before returning to her own ramen. The two chatted about their class as they eat, laughing about some of the antics of their mutual friend Shikamaru. After they were done, they walked together, still chatting happily. When they finally came to an intersection, Ino turned and smiled at him. Well, my home is this way. Thanks for the food, Naruto. I must admit ramen is better than I thought it was. Hey, always happy to help someone realize the greatness of ramen, he said. Ino laughed. Yep, I'll have to let you treat me again sometime. Though next time you want a date, just ask instead of bullying me over, okay? She said, winking at him, before turning around and heading towards her house. Naruto just stood there for a few seconds, before laughing to himself and shaking his head. He wasn't quite ready to go back to his apartment yet. There wasn't anything to do there except sleep and eat, and since he had already eaten and wasn't tired yet, he decided to go for a walk around the village. The sun was beginning to set, giving the sky an orange glow. He stopped and looked at the Hokage mountain, once again making his silent affirmation that one day his face would be up there. He continued his walk, ignoring the occasional glare from the villagers. He found himself near a small lake. He looked over it for a few moments, admiring the way the lake reflected the last rays of light for the day. He shook himself from his sightseeing, and noticed something else. Sitting at the edge of the lake was Sasuke. He looked angry, as always, staring off into the depths of the lake. Seeming to feel eyes on him, he looked up and stared at Naruto, before glaring and turning away to contemplate whatever it was he found so interesting about the lake. Naruto shrugged. Sasuke always seemed to be like this anymore. Every now and then he'd seem to cheer up, but it'd only last for a few seconds at most before he went right back to his sullen attitude. He was about to walk away, but he decided he finally had to know why. Turning around, he made his way down the small incline to where Sasuke was brooding. Hey Sasuke, how's it going? Naruto asked. Sasuke gave him a brief glance before turning back to the lake. What do you want, Dobi? He replied. Naruto just sighed. Come on Sasuke. What's wrong? I mean, we've never been, well, friends I guess. But I thought we were kinda like, I don't know, friendly rivals or something. But anymore all you seem to do is scowl and be angry. Sasuke was silent. Naruto stared at him, before sitting down beside him, staring off into the distance. They sat like that for a few minutes, the only sound being that of an occasional fish splashing in the lake. You really wanna know, Dobi? Sasuke finally said, his voice tinted with anger. Naruto turned and saw Sasuke was glaring at him. He nodded his head. My family was killed. Everyone I ever knew or cared about was killed by the person I was closest to. He killed my mother, my father, everyone. And then he made me watch. And he told me to run away, and to hate him. And I do. And one day, I'm going to find him, and I'm going to kill him. That's what's wrong with me, you idiot. I don't have time for friends or your childish pranks or your happy attitude. I have to get stronger so I can avenge my family. It was probably the most Sasuke had ever said to him at one time. Sasuke himself seemed surprised at his outburst, closing his mouth so tightly that it appeared as a thin line. Sasuke? Naruto was at a loss for words. He'd heard about the Uchiha massacre, of course. It was all over the town for months after it had happened. Heck, some of the more deranged villagers had even said that he was the cause of it. Still though, Sasuke, I know it must hurt. I mean, I never knew my family, but I bet it's worse to have happy memories of them and then have them taken away. He felt his voice starting to crack, but he plowed on. But I don't think your family would want to see you like this. And you don't have to be a friendless bastard in order to get strong. Look at the Hokage. He's the strongest person in the village, and he's friendly to just about everyone. Sasuke looked pensive, before he snorted and turned back to the lake. What would you know, Dobi? He said. I know that you're never gonna become strong sitting here staring at a lake. Or on your own. You'll need the help of people who care about you. Naruto said, standing up and dusting his pants off. I want to help you, Sasuke. But if all you wanna do is sit there and be angry, there's nothing I can do, but I'll always be around if you need anything. Even if it's just someone to spar with. Naruto said with a smile. He turned and started walking back up the incline to the road, but he could have sworn that as he left, he had seen Sasuke smirk. Nah, had to have been my imagination. He thought to himself, heading back to his home. The final year passed quickly. The students were kept fairly busy, both with sharpening their skills for the final exam, and with Naruto. As the year dragged on, the blonde ninja to be seemed to be at the center of more and more pranks, often assisted by his on-again off-again friends Shikamaru, Choji, or Kiba. There were times when Iruka almost demanded that the Hokage supply aspirin to the academy teachers. Then Naruto pulled off his prank of the century. Nobody was quite sure how he did it without anyone noticing. The Hokage monument was visible from practically any point in the village, so how Naruto was able to paint on each of the 4 faces without anybody noticing was a feat all on its own. But it didn't stop there. He then ran through the village, leading 2 Chunin on a merry little chase, constantly giving them the slip before being chased by some more. Iruka had finally caught the little troublemaker hiding behind a cloth made to blend in with the surrounding fence line. He dragged him back to class, flabbergasted at how much trouble his student was able to cause, before the day had even really began. Honestly, Naruto, what were you thinking? Iruka asked, exhausted with the blonde's antics. Ah, come on, Iruka-sensei. Making it look like old man Hokage was staring down at the bathhouse with a perverted look on his face is hilarious. Naruto replied, a wide grin on his face. The rest of the class laughed, causing his grin to grow even wider. Iruka just sighed. Naruto, you don't have time to be wasting on these silly pranks, the final exam is tomorrow, you know. Naruto stuck his tongue